John, welcome.
Good evening, Scots.
Good
Welcome.
evening. Good sir.
Yeah.
We're doing something really special this
Mm.
evening. Now, most of you can't tell, maybe with John, if you could explain your look, what's going on there? Because
Yeah.
you're in Vegas, that could be an everyday look.
Yeah, it's like prom, 1988. I thought, today's topic is going to be about fashion in films. So I'm going with the 1980 something Magnum PI look today. If you could just cut off this,
Yeah.
I'd have the Tom Selleck thing going. Of course, wearing the, my favorite Steph Nation hat, which actually matches well with the pink in the shirt. But yeah, being here in Vegas, this shirt actually does. I could wear this. I could wear this out tonight to dinner and fit right in with the rest of the the seniors here in Las Vegas.
Well, I'd say dinner's pretty close. What is it's 4 o'clock there? They're serving that up pretty soon.
Yeah, the seniors are all already in line for the early bird. But I'm really having a deep appreciation for your outfit tonight. A deep appreciation and a little bit of jealousy.
Well, let me tell you, no need to be jealous because I can show you on Amazon where I got this beautifully handcrafted suit from Amazon Prime. As you mentioned, tonight we're talking about fashion in movies, which it's an amazing list that we have, everyone. And what we're talking about isn't just movies about fashion. These are movies that came out at the time that weren't a reflection of another time, movies that really helped define fashion. So when you were growing up, let's say in the 80s, and you saw a movie, you saw people wearing this, you went out and the whole industry and everyone was trying to buy these same clothes, started, almost by like a Hollywood trend. So that's what tonight's, and what I'm wearing, with my age and how I look and my, general hygiene, you can't tell, is it a homeless? A, is it a homeless guy? B, is it a dude who was as a earthquake refugee, or he had to go down to the local Goodwill and they just gave him whatever that was on the rack that didn't have lice? Or number 3, a feeble attempt at Miami Vice, which, hey, it was a TV series, but I almost say Scarface, if you will. Maybe homeless meets Scarface. And so we wanted to celebrate, kind of our 80s heritage. But John, going into our topic here, as we said, we're not talking about movies about fashion, for example, or biographies and whatnot. There's stuff about Coco Chanel. There's stuff about Yves Saint Laurent, The Devil Wears Prada, almost kind of just fashion oriented movies. These are just movies that help define. And we're going to look at the different decades here from the 50s going forward. But John, let me just tell you right now, tell me a moment that you had when you saw a movie and you just said, I have to go buy what they're wearing.
Yeah, that's a good question. Films, and you hit this nail right on the head, Scott. These films we're going to talk about today are films that when I remember as a kid growing up, and they're watching these movies, fashion played a big part. It set trends, right? It set the trends in fashion in what kids were wearing, especially when you're younger in junior high and high school. So for me, when I saw Fast Times at Ridgemont High for the first time, and I saw Jeff Spicoli wearing the Vans checker slip-ons, I'm like, I gotta get a pair. I really, really gotta get a pair of those. Growing up in the Midwest, we didn't have surf culture. I mean, surf culture was basically in movies, right? Or if you went somewhere and got like a surfer magazine, you kind of got a glimpse into it. But really, we saw that culture through TV and through movies. So when I saw Jeff Spicoli in his Hawaiian shirt kind of open, his jeans with the bagel tucked in, and his slip-on Vans, I'm like, that Southern California surf look to people like me in the Midwest was epic, right? I mean, it kind of looks stupid because we lived in the Midwest. Like, you're nowhere near an ocean. Like, Michigan is the closest thing we had, but that's the one movie I saw. And there was a lot. I mean, trust me, there's a lot of other ones, but that's one in particular I can kind of point at and go, I wanted to have those shoes, and it did. It's that movie lit vans on fire, and it became a massive trend in the 80s, and then they had a
Yeah.
rebirth, late in the 2000s now.
Oh, well, it was a huge scene. I mean, Vans, a Southern California brand and whatnot. Um, it was big, obviously, before the movie, but it was never, let's say, Adidas or Nike, the kings of the
Mm,
shoe world. But that
yeah.
was a movie that um, that style, the checkered style,
Mm,
where it was black and white. That version was, that even in Southern California, it just blew up, and everyone, as you said, whether you're in Illinois or Southern
hmm
California, had to get it, and that was that's a great example of. It's not even a product. I don't know if you give it a product placement, but it was just what people wore, that slip-on kind of easy version,
Yep.
but
Yep.
really helped drive a brand and a stylish
Oh,
shoe.
I knew it was a success when you started seeing knockoffs, right?
Oh
Like
yeah,
you,
those
you
are
start
bad.
you start seeing knockoff Vans, checkerboard slip-ons, like like a Kmart or Sears, or I
Yeah.
mean, and you knew quite well they weren't the real thing, but they were knockoffs. So you knew it at some point when you're getting knocked off, you've hit the pinnacle. And Vans, it was that, and it took that brand, who was once like a surfer BMX brand of shoe, to a different level. It really took the brand into a new stratosphere.
Well, I think other movies we have on this list did the same for other people in different generations. Is there a movie that you have that you were in doing your research that you wish you could have? For example, that was the early 80s with Fast Times, but was there a movie in the 50s or the 40s and where you're like, gosh, if I was, you're watching it now, but you're like, back then, the effect it had.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a movie, there's two actually, but the one I remember really is Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean,
Hmm.
who to me was also a fashion icon, not only for like just his clothing, but like just his look, right? Like
Hmm.
James Dean had a look that was just so freaking cool. Like he just had a
Hmm.
great look about him. And he had that red jacket. I remember talking to my dad about this. And my dad, was born in the Netherlands, in Holland, and grew up in the 40s and the 50s. And he remembers going to see Rebel Without a Cause in the theater in Amsterdam. And after that, after he saw the movie, everyone in Amsterdam
Yeah.
wanted the red jacket. I remember that movie, that time frame, and then of course the Wild Bunch with Marlon Brando, who really had this motorcycle culture, and he had that leather jacket, the blue jeans with the motorcycle boots. I mean, he just badass. I love those two looks from the 50s. Those were cool looks. I mean, I'm also a massive, huge Cary Grant fan, who I think is a style icon, and his
Hmm.
look through all the 30s and 40s and even to the 50s. I mean, like a Sean Connery, who wore, like, no one wore a gray suit like Sean Connery. No one could wear it as well as him. Like
So
he
what
was,
movies, if you had to give anyone, like, okay, let's take a James Dean, for
yeah,
example, what was the
yeah.
iconic, like the one your
So,
dad saw?
so Rebel Without a Cause,
Okay,
James
got
Dean.
that.
The
Perfect.
Wild Bunch with Marlon Brando. I would say, I would say the Man with the Golden. No, I would say, who would I say for Doctor No,
Dr. No.
which is a great film with Sean Connery, who is immaculately dressed throughout that entire film. I thought if you go see those three films, you're going to see great men in suits, number one with Sean Connery, and then you're just going to see like this, like the teenage angst, right? In
Yeah.
in James Dean and Marlon Brando, they're just so good. Those are my recommendations.
Well, those are amazing examples, because I got to be honest with you. Even for me, who is I can't say I'm heavily into fashion or whatnot, but I lived in France many years, and specifically
Yeah,
Paris, and it's just
yeah,
just by nature, it's like kind of being in LA if you're in the entertainment industry, or New York banking, but just by being there and having so many friends in the industry, I kind of got into clothes.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I watched James Bond, and specifically the Sean Connery years, and I did research because it was the same reaction. I saw it. I'm not from the 60s. I was born in the 70s and whatnot. But I saw it, and I could see how influential that is, just for me being a kid from California. And I went to London to the Turnbull and Asser store that suited
Yeah.
James Bond. I did the research, and I went to the store. I think it's on that's Savile Road, Jermyn Street,
Yeah.
something, you know, that
Yeah.
garment district in London. And I got a hand, you know, one of those bespoke shirts. Cost me a freaking fortune, and it was so
Yeah.
worth it. I still have it,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
always feel like
Yeah.
you know, now like a grungy James Bond when I wear it, and it just fits like a glove. But I got to tell you, well, it did when I was in shape. Now you know, they'll have to, like, you know, add some
Oh,
material or whatever.
no.
But yeah, but I just tell you, it was just so influential. And the movies like Wild Bunch with Marlon Brando, I heard that look with the motorcycle came from World War II bomber
Yep.
jackets. And so
Yep.
they kind of brought that excitement after the war in the 50s. And that set off a new trend. I mean, think about any 50s set movie, from Happy Days to Grease and whatnot. The cool dude, he's not in a linen suit, right? He's in a leather jacket. Even rock and roll, you could say, was tied to those movies. The kind of the traditional rock and roll look, right, with Elvis and whatnot. And but that to me is just like those are great examples of how movies really drive fashion. And it's just, as you said, it's global. Your dad in friggin' Amsterdam is sitting there trying to, hey, where do I get that jacket? Now, in today's world, there'd be an Amazon tag that you could press on it, and it would take you right to it.
There'd be a QR code. But you know, the same thing happened. Like, I think about jackets, like when Top Gun came out, right?
Yeah.
Top Gun came out. We all went to see it, and everyone saw Tom Cruise wearing that the leather bomber jacket with the patches on it. And everybody where I lived in Chicago, everyone wanted one of those, because it just was like the Ray-Ban sunglasses, the wireframes, and that leather jacket with the patches. It was like a shitstorm. People like, oh my God, I can look as cool as him if I wear that jacket. Chances are, no, you're gonna look like an idiot. But it makes you feel that way. You feel like you're kind of embodying part of that character. Therefore, you can be cool too, and women will desire you, which was never my case.
Yeah, and it's an incredible strategy if you think about product launch, right? If you're working a fashion house, and you usually do the runways, and you have the press to cover these, you know, new concepts, with your models and whatnot. But think about this: you get a celebrity, you get a designer, you put them together, you get a Hollywood budget, bam, you're everywhere. And I think they started to figure that out. One that was, if we look through the decades, for example, so we're looking at the 50s, Rebel Without a Cause.
Yep.
If we go into the 60s, this to me, and it's a little more relatable to me than the 50s, just because of our ages and whatnot. This is when I got really interested in film in the 60s. I just thought the topics were a little more interesting. You have, Dan, you told me Breakfast at Tiffany's, which is
and it actually came from you know, my Carla, you know, my wife, she's been in fashion her whole life.
Oh, you got to give credit, right? We got to make
Carla gets much credit here. And she brought up Breakfast at Tiffany's, which is a really good film with Audrey Hepburn, but that launched what was termed as the Little Black Dress, which still exists today. And that was the first time that dress had really kind of, it was a garment that all of a sudden people saw it in the movie. Next thing you know, it's a thing. Like the little black dress became a big thing because of Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. So that one was one that Carla called out specifically because it did start a very big trend for a color and style of dress that just still, even today, I think most women have at least one or two or three little black dresses they can throw on at any given time for any given event. It'll work.
Well, when I saw the list, I got to admit, I was a little suspicious at, you know, if you had taken someone else's work here, and you immediately said,
I did.
This is Carla's. So we have to
stole her work.
We have to give credit where credit is due.
Oh yeah.
A little black dress. I mean, it's almost just a common signature in our language today. For me, I in the 60s, when I was looking through kind of, you know, the major hits of that decade, I thought one that was a kind of a cult classic, it was called Blow Up
Yeah.
by Michelangelo Antonioni, if I said that right. Jeez.
Yeah.
It's just
Sounds right.
It's Italian, dude. I'll just kind of
It's a
slur.
Michelangelo and
Oh, yeah,
Angelini.
I'll slur that last part.
Yeah.
But this was all about the swinging
Mhm.
London scene, right? The swinging
Yeah.
60s. And this is pre Austin Powers. So you
Right.
can kind of see how Austin Powers, where he got all of his garb, but this was actually kind of the cool side of it. And I thought that was a really fascinating, not only movie, but just the way the the fashion really led the feeling.
Yeah.
Um, and that to me was that kind of 60s look,
Mhm.
uh, and especially a little bit of that, European flair to it.
Yeah, and London had a massive
Yeah.
fashion scene in the 60s. This with the research that I've done and some documentaries I've seen, of course, living with a documentarian like Carla on fashion. London had a massive,
Yeah.
was highly influential during the 60s in fashion. They had a very specific look that
Mhm.
was all their own that became global because everyone saw it. Like, I want to look like that. I want to have those shoes and my hair like that and this
Yeah,
jacket. And it became a very big thing. And that movie is a great example that illustrates that.
exactly. Even if
Yeah.
you even think about the Beatles, right? You think
Yeah.
about, and I remember asking my mom, and I'm a huge Beatles fan. So I said, "Hey, mom,
Yeah.
what was it like?" And the first thing she said was just, "I couldn't believe what they look like. They were so
Yeah.
different. Their hair, their suits, everything, their shoes."
Hmm.
And it was really interesting to hear a comment just about, not necessarily the music, but the look, and how this look was, I think, almost their artistic director was German. So you had like a German influence with, these guys from Liverpool, then imported into the United States, and everyone just, it was so cool, and it was so
Yeah.
avant-garde, if you can believe that.
Yeah. 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 For
um,
sure. I mean, they definitely created a whole trend just in hair alone.
yeah, yeah.
Like just the hairstyle they created was like iconic. And then the Beetle boots, like the boots they wore, absolutely huge.
As we get into the 70s,
Yeah.
and when if I said, "Hey, John, we're gonna throw a party, and it's gonna be a 70s party," right? And you think 1970 to 1979, right? It's 10 years.
Yeah.
What are most people gonna wear? Right?
Yeah. You can't go to a 70s party without a disco look, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it was at the heartbeat of the 70s was the whole disco look. And at the heart of that was Saturday Night Fever, which
Mhm.
created I don't even want to call it. It's created a whole nother dimension in fashion. You saw John Travolta in the tight shirts, the butterfly collar, and the tight bell-bottom pants, and the platform boots, and the hair. I mean, such a great movie, number one. But
Yeah.
that movie defined a generation of fashion.
Oh, yeah.
I think it did. I mean, a particular look, mind you, but a look that was massive across the country, not just in New York City, but it became massive. So
Yeah.
that's a movie that I would say that brought fashion. If you're going to go to a 70s party, that goes without saying.
Well, I think what it did, and I've done some research about this movie, is that they actually felt like it was coming out too late. It was almost at the end
Mm,
of the cool phase of disco, right? You have that
yeah.
adoption curve where the cool people like it, and then when it becomes
Yeah.
mass, like it's like, no, dude, that's old fashioned. Um, and so the clothes at the time were already, kind of you'd say the cool kids were wearing it. So, but
Yeah.
I think, as you said, it really defined it. It really
Yeah.
said, okay, this is it, as opposed to setting the trend. Like a
Yeah.
Hollywood producer going, okay, I have a vision for what people are going to be wearing. Let's get a designer and let's show this. So it was like new to everyone, and but
Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, 70s,
Yeah.
it's
And
just, it defaults to disco.
it was a great era, and I'll mention one more, and then I'll let you have one that I know you're going to want to talk about. But Annie Hall was one that
Yeah.
Carla brought up because it was, and the more I looked into that, and she and I talked about it, Diane Keaton started a
Yeah.
major fashion trend with her look
Mhm.
at the movie Annie Hall. I was watching this documentary this week on this gentleman named Bill Cunningham, who was a photographer for the New York Times. And he rode around New York on a bicycle for 2 decades, basically documenting fashion in New York City. And he put in the Times he was an incredible person, and he talked in this documentary. He talked about that movie and how during that part of the 70s, that look with the men's tie and the men's shirt and trousers, which is actually kind of a post Katharine Hepburn, who was really the first movie star to wear long trousers in a movie. Diane Keaton started this whole look with the hat. I think it's a super cool look. Even today, women could still wear that exact look and be right in vogue. So that one was interesting. One that Carla brought up that I didn't really think about. The movie itself, I'm okay on, but in terms of the fashion, not Woody Allen's fashion, mind you, but her fashion was pretty epic.
It's funny you mention that, because actually, when I talked to my mom about this, and one thing my mom and I always shared was watching movies. She mentioned that too. And she mentioned it unsolicited. She said that look was everywhere. But it was not like Saturday Night Fever, which kind of showed you what was existing. This was, that look was innovative, and it was like in the late 70s.
Yeah.
Urban, you're an empowered woman. This is what you wear.
It was breakthrough.
Yeah, that was it. It was really breakthrough. And some of the others that we have on here, I mean, we're talking about Smoking the Bandit. Now this, I think it's more of a regional play there.
I think a regional play, but think about the other one, right? I mean, think about that urban cowboy look, right? Urban Cowboy. We talk about that movie constantly because it's so good. I mean, that movie, like Gillies Tavern, which was in Texas, that movie, I mean, that defined like this whole new cowboy look. I don't know how long it lasted because I was too young to really get into it. But you know what though? I would have totally been in with, if I was like, if I was like 20 and like living in Chicago, I would have tried to pull that shit off. I would have tried. It's so cool.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It could have gone easily to Village People, bro. I think it could.
Oh, depending on the neighborhood, it could have definitely gone one way or the other, right? But
there's no judgment either way, man. It's just saying, it just depends what you're going for.
Right. In a city, it's a little bit, you're going to raise a few more eyebrows. Maybe where my wife grew up, which is a little bit more, I don't say rural. That kind of look was right in. But I always love the cowboy looks. I love cowboy movies. And so I love that look, and I would have been one of those idiots who would have been like trying to rock the look in Chicago and getting looks from a lot of different kinds of people, I'm sure. But I would have tried it without a doubt. And Smoking the Bandit. I mean, Burt Reynolds, come on.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely interesting. Like the kind of the redneck, the celebration of the South was starting to come out. But I'll tell you this, going into the 80s, and this to me, and I'm gonna talk about one of my favorite movies, just in general, but one that was, I think, if I could say it right here officially on Steph Nation, one of the defining fashion movies is American Gigolo, starring Richard Gere, released in 1980, right? So they were shooting this in 1979. Takes place in Los Angeles. And they had hired Italian designer Giorgio Armani, who was an unknown at the time. And if you think about 1979, 80, right? This is where the 80s and the 70s and the 80s were starting to, the 80s weren't really defined yet, right? When you watch a lot of movies in 1980, they were shot in 79, and they still have those lapels. There's that little bit of the
bell bottoms are still going on.
That's right. That's right. You got to think about that. The late 70s almost happened in the early 80s. But here it is. You got Richard Gere in a classic scene, right? He's a male, he's a gigolo, okay, male prostitute, and he's picking out his clothes, right? And so there's this amazing scene where the camera pans across his closet, and they show him literally opening up his drawers and showing these very, at the time, super modern looks. The ties were skinny. They weren't that satin lapels. These were super, super chic. And they dedicate a lot of film time to him picking out his clothes. And the movie's great too. I mean, it's
Mm.
Richard Gere, whatever. But
Yeah.
I think that scene is iconic, and I think they parodied this. They did a parody of this in American Deuce Bigelow.
Yeah.
It's a
That's so
different version, but I thought, because
funny.
if you think about that defining point, when you think about 80s, almost new wave, right? Early
Mm.
80s, with they're trying to swing away from that 70s look, with the skinny tie, almost that mod style.
Yeah.
This is where I think it began. The 80s began here, but didn't really become mass, until 82, 83, when the 80s kind of became the 80s, if you will,
Yeah.
kind of got rid of
Yeah.
the 70s. But that
Yep.
was, like, I think, a defining point. But then you have, when, again, if we were going to throw an 80s party, they wouldn't really wear Giorgio Armani. They may be doing something more like, or a
Yeah.
better version of this. Like, when there's some movies
Yeah.
you have on the list here are just fantastic.
Yeah, but that American Gigolo, that scene is such a great scene. And I mean, his closet, you just want to drool over it. He's like these beautiful suits, and they're so perfectly put in his closet. It's just, it's like unbelievable. So that's a great call out. I don't think I have one movie in the 80s that I could point at and go, this is my definitive movie for fashion in the 80s. There's just too many.
Yeah.
And I pick and choose little pieces from a lot of them. And we talked about some of them already. Valley Girl was one that Carla brought up that I agree with, was one that, like, to me, I saw that movie so many times, but I remember seeing that movie and thinking, even though it takes place in the Valley, in Southern California,
Yeah.
that look was a look that most kids, like in junior high and high school, were really, really going for. Carla mentioned Flashdance, because that set off this massive trend of, like, the off the shoulder sweatshirts and the leg warmers. Risky Business with Tom Cruise and the Ray-Bans. It blew Ray-Ban, the Wayfarer, off the charts, right? I think the other one I know you'll appreciate it was Wall Street. The Gordon Gekko look. I mean, just come on. I mean, the Gordon Gekko look today is
specifically
so good.
It was the like white collar with the blue, like the multi, you would say, or bicolor. I don't know what the appropriate word is, but the that stylish shirt with the heavy cuff, the French cuff,
the suspenders, right?
Yeah.
Totally. Kind of
So
a little bit broader,
decadent.
little broader shouldered suit.
Yeah.
I mean, and he was just so good. I mean, that's such. I mean, that movie, it's a great movie, number one. But Gordon Gekko, like, the look of that character was unbelievable. I also think movies like Indiana Jones with the hat and his distressed jacket was a look that I think about. And of course, Footloose was one that kind of brought back the skinny tie, right? From that mod era, all of a sudden Kevin Bacon and the skinny tie, these kind of leather pointed dress shoes became a thing all of a sudden that people were wearing. The tighter jeans, just that look that started with Kevin Bacon, and Footloose was another one that I pick and choose from. Of course, Fast Times, of course, with Jeff Spicoli and his whole look were great. And of course, I would, you mentioned a great one in Scarface.
Yeah. Well, I think, that Scarface to me was one that not only defined a period, almost, I won't say an ethnicity, but, this Cuban, it was Cuban immigrants, but it was the colors. It was Miami's now on the map, not for the best reasons, but it just had that look. And I think you saw it in not only in music coming out, but like album covers. I'm always fascinated with those kind of, when the one movement, and it's like a double helix, one ends and one's beginning. And it just was a reaction against all the mustard yellows and the olive greens of the 70s. And you have these fluorescent, super bright colors. And I think Scarface, just even the way his house is decorated and the cheesy flamingo paintings and all that. But it's one of those, and you'll see it like on Duran Duran, the cover of Rio. just has it. But all those 80s movies, and we talked about the John Hughes ones with obviously
Yeah.
Pretty in Pink, but Breakfast Club, and
Oh,
I thought those didn't define, they just kind of reflected on what
they did.
kids were wearing, especially Fast Times. It wasn't like we're going to set trends. We're just going to show you what kids and
It's a
torrents
great
are,
way.
you know.
That's a great way to put it. It wasn't they were breaking any boundaries. They were just
Yeah.
a real reflection
Mhm.
into what fashion was, and
Yeah.
to a bigger audience, especially, you know, people in different areas of the country. It started trends,
Yeah.
right? You began to see those kind of trends, and you're right. Like when Miami Vice came out, I'm like, God. I mean, I never pulled off the Miami Vice look with the kind of pink.
You can do it, man. You're
The
almost
pink,
there.
the pink t-shirt and the white jacket with the rolled up sleeves. I mean,
Oh,
that was a massive movement.
such a big
It
people
was like,
people are still wearing it
I mean,
today.
it was parodied in the Wedding Singer
Yeah.
movie, right, with Adam Sandler. The guy, Glenn Guglia, was was the bad guy, and
Yeah.
he wore that home, and they parodied it because it was such a huge thing. You
Yeah.
know, the Michael Jackson leather jackets that went on with the Michael Jackson jackets with all the zippers on it, the parachute pants. But I think a lot of the movies that I mentioned, it's a really good way to look at it, were movies that just reflected what was happening versus creating something new and innovative. It was more like, these are just things that people are seeing, and I'm sure the brands and manufacturers are just like, we are gonna exploit this to the nth degree.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of these, you know, especially in the 80s, they were talking about, there was the business side was becoming more sophisticated, matching almost
Absolutely.
with the trends and industries that were growing, such as skateboarding was growing in Southern California. So they do their research, they make a movie about it, which reinforces the industry, and everyone's making money.
Absolutely.
But I think those that really sustain, like as you said, with Breakfast at Tiffany's, or Annie Hall, you know, these are stylistic visions of a fashion designer with a producer, as well as the director of the movie, like in that case, Woody Allen, the black and white, super uber intellectual Manhattan. All those are just, they're so influential. Even today.
And that a lot of that took place in the 50s, like Marilyn Monroe. I mean, Marilyn Monroe, every time she wore a look, it became a fashion icon. It became breakthrough. You saw a lot of that in those days, and a little bit in the 70s, and maybe a little bit in the 80s with some different kinds of looks. But it's just awesome either way. It's just fun to watch.
Well, just kind of wrapping up here, as we look at the kind of some of these later movies, similar examples of, I'd say, reflections of the time, or sign of the times. You had Clueless with Alicia Silverstone.
Oh yeah.
And I loved how they almost made fun of the fashion at the time. There's a great scene where she's reflecting on, like, why do guys wear these baggy clothes, like, which was exactly what was going on in the 90s. Right? And so she's like, you know, almost out of her time looking back. And I even thought that in Fast Times at Richmond High, when they're at, again, like kind of like Mean Girls, where you're at the lunch scene, right? And you can kind of see all the, it's like a mosaic, all the different fashion and cliques and whatnot. And she's talking about the Pat Benatar. She's like, here's the Pat Benatar people, you know, here are your stoners, here are your
And they did that in Clueless too. I mean, she said these are the stoners, these are the skateboard kids. Here are like these kids. And it really did put kids into different buckets based on their particular look, which was about fashion, clothing, and the hair. Absolutely. And you know, another great one is I still love this movie, is Singles. I mean, that defined, I won't say that, but it brought to life, to a larger extent, it sort of maybe even, I don't know, exploited what was already happening in Seattle with that grunge look. It just took that into mainstream, into the movie theater, when you saw all these like local musicians in Seattle wearing what they normally wear, because that's what they wear in Seattle. And next thing you know, like, it's on the runway. You know, like, there's ridiculous runway shows with like women in like flannel shirts rolled up, and but that was a movie that I thought kind of just sort of solidified and brought, and maybe and exploited to a certain extent, that whole grunge look.
So let me ask this question to close. What trend from a movie Or what movie re-release would you like to see keeping the original clothes to stimulate that clothing trend?
Oh,
Like, if, for
wow.
example, I mean, Magnum PI was a television series, but
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
easily say, any early 80s with Hawaiian shirts.
Yeah, I think there's not a like if you think about it, it's a good question. I would answer, if you think about movies like in the 90s, like, you know, Clueless and Singles, there's some of that look that still gets around today. If I have to go back and like look at a movie that I would say I would like to go back in that time, I have to go back and Urban Cowboys a fun
I
one, but I
gotcha,
don't.
man. I
I
knew
don't.
that was coming.
I think I would do Urban Cowboy, but maybe not so urban. Maybe a little bit more. Maybe a little bit more like John Wayne and one of the
Okay.
made John Wayne and she wore a yellow ribbon,
Okay.
or the
Yeah.
Searchers.
Yeah. You kind of want to stay. There's that
It's
city bar,
cool,
the
rugged.
Rawhide, which is
Yeah.
that gay bar in San Francisco, which is catered towards
Right.
urban cowboys. That's one side, or that's one area. You're kind of looking towards the John Wayne.
Hey, I'm more of like the John Wayne from the Searchers,
Okay.
where he
All
just
good.
looked like just
No
the.
judgment. It's
I
all
think I
good.
could. I think the cowboy look is. I remember. I'll be short. I went with my father-in-law years and years ago to a friend of his. He has a friend who has a cattle ranch in East Texas, and he got me a whole cowboy get up in Fort Worth. I had like the shirt, I had the lambskin jacket, I had the jeans, the boots, I had the hat. I was on a horse. It was one of the greatest days of my life.
I got it, man. I got it. We got the cowboy look.
Yep.
I
How
hear
about
it.
you?
For me, I had a glimmer of hope with the look, which is kind of more of a default look. This is not a tried, or what I say, there's no effort. This is just more of a passive, aggressive, whatever. There was the Royal Tenenbaums. Did you ever see that?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay,
Of
where
course.
there was
Yeah,
the guys that wore the Adidas track outfit and had a headband.
Yeah.
Well, that was the look that I thought was going to come back, and I was going to be the hippest dude ever. I could actually look the part of that movie, and I thought that was going to create a trend. It didn't. It just looked like clowns. So,
but you know what though? You pull that look off well, right? I think you pulled off well. I think it was on D-Side Stories. It was a comment by our friend Seth, who said, "Scott, you're so uncool. You're incredibly cool right now."
Oh, yeah.
And I think you could pull that look off and make it work so good. Where everyone else may look like an idiot, you could pull that around a Tenenbaum and just rock it.
I could rock. Well, maybe I'll have to bust out the tracksuit and
I think you should. You definitely
well, listen,
need to.
everyone. Hey, thank you so much for joining, John and I. And we got to pay a special thank you to Carla Bouvet, who was our consultant in this episode, and who brings a little bit of class and style to us two heathens here.
Yeah, and Scott, she can help you too if you need help.
Yeah,
she can help you.
Again, that's not even a question.
She can help.
There's a hotline out there for me that just like, hey, first of all, just let's start off with showering. Let's do the basics right. In any case, everyone, listen, have a great weekend, and again, live out how you want to, however you want to be. If it's Beyond Borg, which I'm going for now, apparently, or John Travolta, an Urban Cowboy. Everyone, just
giddy up.
Yeah, you only live once. Get out there. See everyone.
Bye-bye.